I think there's no question that Israel is in a position militarily now where it can act as a bully in the region. And we don't want to underestimate the importance of Israel's alliance with the United States. I mean, the two of them act as a tag team in the region. And that's a huge force multiplier for the Israelis. I have a slightly different view of this than you do. And I believe that if you go back to the period after Israel was created, the Israelis have had a deep-seated interest in basically wrecking all of their Arab neighbors. What's happening now to Syria, or what's happened to Syria over the past year and a half, is what the Israelis would like to do to Iran. They want to fracture their neighbors, break them apart if possible. When the Israelis talk about regime change in Iran, they're talking about more than regime change. They want to break Iran into constituent parts. The Israelis, for example, have had a deep-seated interest in creating a Kurdish state. And I've always wondered why the Israelis were interested in creating a Kurdish state and paying so much attention to Kurdish nationalism. It's because if you created a Kurdish state, you would break apart Iraq, Iran, Syria, and even Turkey. And this has long been their goal. It's a divide and conquer policy. So I think it's just important to understand that they do want to be the most powerful state in the region, as you were alluding to. But it's more than that. They believe that the way to do that is to be joined at the hip with the United States, number one. Number two, be the only state in the region that has nuclear weapons. Number three, be by far the most powerful conventional force in the region. And number four, break apart their rivals, or put their rivals in a position where they're heavily dependent on the United States. This is what they've done with Jordan and with Egypt. Jordan and Egypt have hardly any maneuver room vis-a-vis Israel because they're economically dependent on Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam has told them that if they challenge Israel in any way, the United States will make them pay economically. So that's how you deal with Egypt and Jordan. And with countries like Syria, countries like Lebanon, countries like Iran, countries like Iraq, the basic goal there is to wreck those countries, to break them apart, to make them dysfunctional. And that's the second goal. That's the regime change goal when you dig down deep. The bombing campaign by Israel against Iran, which started, of course, on June 13th, has had exactly the opposite effect in terms of the leadership of Iran. The hardliners have taken over. The Revolutionary Guards are in control more than they ever were. The Ayatollah Khamenei has been weakened because he's been forced to basically go into hiding, and he's not in a position where he can command the country in any meaningful way. And furthermore, all the evidence is that the people are rallying around the flag. And we have a rich history of this happening every time a country launches a bombing campaign against another country for the purposes of regime change. We have a rich historical record here, and there is not a single instance, I want to emphasize, not a single instance where bombing from the air alone has caused regime change. And all the evidence is that it causes a rally around the flag effect. So the idea that the Israelis are going to cause regime change with their air campaign is not a serious argument. And if you look at what's happened over the past 12 days, it has not turned out that the country is on the verge of regime change. If anything, the regime is in a better situation today than it was on June 12th, the day before the campaign started. So this is a failure. What happened there is that you had a ground war, right? We didn't have to invade, but we had proxies who had gone to war against Gaddafi, and we then came in with air power. But here the argument is that you come in with air power, there's no revolution, there's no war on the ground, and air power precipitates a revolution. That doesn't happen. Again, to go back to the Libya case, the revolution had already started. There was or the rebellion, call it what you want. And there was a huge ground war taking place. And that's when air power came in. And in those sorts of circumstances, you can do it, but not in this case. We could not do a regime change in Iraq from the air. Otherwise, we would have done it. Remember shock and awe? We went in with shock and awe. It didn't lead to regime change. We had to go in, conquer the country, and then spend months looking for Saddam Hussein. The fact is that they have not been able to do it up to now. And after what's happened over the past 12 days, the regime has every incentive to crack down on those groups and make sure that they can't cause any trouble. Now, can I say with 100% certainty that there won't be an uprising in 6 months or 12 months? No, I can't. It's very hard to say how this plays out over time inside of Iran. But the fact is that there is no evidence now of an uprising. And you also have a regime that has powerful incentives to make sure that that remains the case for the foreseeable future. So I don't think you're going to get regime change. But Glenn, then the question pops up, what happens if you do get regime change? What's the happy ending here? Are you telling me that we're going to get a new regime that is going to say, we don't want nuclear weapons. We don't want to cause Israel or the United States any trouble in the region. And we're going to behave ourselves according to the dictates of Israel. You think that's going to happen? This is not going to happen. I would also point out to you, of course, when the revolution in Iran took place in 1979, it was the Shah who was overthrown. The Shah had an ambitious nuclear program, and the Shah was committed to acquiring nuclear weapons. And the reason is that it makes sense from Iran's point of view to have nuclear weapons. Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel and former defense minister as well, once said that he believed that Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons because it made so much sense. Just think about that statement. He, of course, is a very smart man, and he is correct. It makes eminently good sense for Iran to have nuclear weapons. I have said on numerous occasions in public that if I had been the Iranian national security advisor, they would have nuclear weapons today. I mean, the lesson of the past 12 days is that Iran was foolish not to get nuclear weapons, in my opinion. And the lesson now is to go out and get nuclear weapons, because if you had nuclear weapons, the Israelis and the Americans would not attack you. So I would just say that even if you get the Shah's son in power in Iran, I bet a lot of money that after a short period of time, he'd be very interested in building nuclear weapons because, again, it makes good strategic sense. There's no question that almost everybody in Israel has come to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that they're doomed to be in a permanent state of emergency, and the threat of war from their neighbors and from the Palestinians is not going away anytime soon. So I think there's unanimity on that dimension of the question that you're asking. Nevertheless, there are significant disagreements inside of Israel on how to deal with that threat environment. And you see it today with regard to the question of a ceasefire in Gaza. There are just lots of people who believe that the Israelis should accept a ceasefire. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu disagrees with that, at least so far. So there are, real differences in that regard. The same thing is true with regard to Gaza. There are a lot of Israelis who tend to be in the center who do not want to remain in Gaza. They think that it's a hornet's nest and Israel should get out. But then you have all sorts of people on the right who would like to kill all the Palestinians in Gaza, ethnically cleanse it, and build settlements in Gaza because they think Gaza is part of the Holy Land. You have to separate what's going on inside Israel from how Israel deals with its external environment. And to start by talking about what's happening inside Israel, as I've long argued, Israel is an apartheid state. And to run an apartheid state, you have to turn the Palestinians into subhumans, or you have to treat the Palestinians like they're subhumans. They're animals. And when you run an apartheid state, you end up brutalizing in the most horrible ways the victims, the second class or third class people who live in your society. And this has been happening inside of Israel for a long time. The Israelis have been torturing prisoners, doing terrible things to the Palestinians for a long, long time. And what happened on October 7th is that those terrible practices that the Israelis employ against the Palestinians were ramped up. And what you see today is that the Palestinians are being treated in the most horrendous ways. And most people in the West cannot believe that the Israelis are doing this because it's so out of line with what you would expect from a liberal democracy. But if you look at how the Israelis themselves think about it, it's quite remarkable how much support there is for this behavior. Channel 12 in Israel recently ran a survey asking Israelis whether they thought it was okay for an Israeli person to rape a terrorist. Okay, is it okay for an Israeli to rape a terrorist? 47% of Israelis, according to Channel 12 in Israel, 47% of Israelis said it's okay, and 42% said it's not okay. What does this say about Israeli society? This is horrible. But that's what you're dealing with. And by the way, there's a new report out from B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group, called Welcome to Hell, which lays out in deep detail what has been happening in Israeli prisons to Palestinians since October 7th. And that report, by the way, makes it clear that what has been happening since October 7th may be an ramped up version of what was happening before October 7th, but never lose sight of the fact that those prisoners were being treated in the most brutal ways before October 7th as well. And if we do tell them to stop or we do criticize them, we do it with very vague language because we never really want to get too tough on them. And it's just the way it operates. I mean, the Israelis can do pretty much anything they want, especially when it comes to the Palestinians. I think if you're talking about Israel dealing with China, you're outside the region, then the United States has a bit of leverage. But if you're talking about inside the region and you're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian issue, Israel can do pretty much anything it wants. And by the way, with regard to Iran, just to talk about the external environment and how the Israelis deal with their external environment, it's quite clear that the United States does not want to get involved in a war with Iran. And now on two occasions, the Israelis have taken military measures that were designed to drag us into a war with Iran. And we were unable to prevent that from happening. And once it did happen, once, the attack on April 1st took place, you remember that's when they hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And then on July 31st, when they took out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, in both of those cases, we did not condemn Israel for what they did. And this is just, normal behavior on our part, that there's going to be a significant response, and I will take them at their word. It is possible that they will change their mind. There's no question that the Americans have been going to enormous lengths to get them to limit the attack. And it may be that they've figured out that there are good reasons to limit the attack in significant ways. I don't know what those are, but they have said that they're going to come full force. They're really going to slam Israel. And I would think that that's true. And by the way, you want to remember that they're not the only actor that's coming after Israel. Hezbollah is coming after Israel too. They've promised that. You want to remember that there were twin assassinations here.
Right.
The Israelis assassinated a Hezbollah leader in southern Beirut on July 30th. Then the next day, July 31st, they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. right? And by the way, the next day on August 1st, they announced that Mohammed Deif, who was the military leader that they had claimed to assassinate on July 13th, they announced on August 1st that he was dead. So if you think about it, what they've done here is on July 30th, assassinated one leader in southern Beirut. On July 31st, they assassinated another leader in Tehran. And then on August 1st, they announced that the earlier killing had been successful. And what the Israelis are doing, and you don't see much discussion of this in the media, or at least in the mainstream media, what the Israelis are doing is they're pursuing a decapitation strategy. They're basically betting that they can kill the leadership of these various opposing organizations, and that will produce some sort of meaningful military victory for them. This is a delusion. We have a whole literature on decapitation strategies. You kill one leader and they just bring in another leader. And the idea that that new leader is going to make peace with Israel is not a serious argument. But why are they pursuing a decapitation strategy? Why are they doing this? It's because they really don't have an alternative. They have no way out of the mess that they're in. That's true in Gaza, and it's true with regard to Hezbollah, Iran, and Hamas more generally. Very important to understand that Turkey is probably the one country in the region, except for maybe Iran, where the leadership is as critical of Israel as the public is. As we've talked about before, in most Arab countries, and this is certainly true in Egypt and Jordan, there is not significant criticism from the top regarding Israeli behavior. And if you go to the street, there is huge anger towards Israel. And the elites in countries like Jordan and Egypt are doing everything they can to make sure that the volcano doesn't explode and they don't get pushed out of office. Turkey, on the other hand, is a case where the elites, this is Erdogan and his foreign minister, as we just heard, are as enraged and as angry about what's going on with regard to Israel and also with regard to the United States. You do not want to underestimate the anti-Americanism inside of Turkey today. It is off the charts because of what's happening in Gaza. But anyway, as you know, you can tell all sorts of nightmare scenarios about how this escalates. And I don't know exactly what Iran will do. I don't know exactly what Hezbollah will do. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, let's assume that Hezbollah and Iran both attack Israel. And let's assume that those attacks are reasonably limited, right? Not massive attacks. Question then is, what will the Israelis do? Will the Israelis limit their retaliation? I doubt that. I think the Israelis place a very high premium on escalation dominance. They've always thought that the best way to deter their adversaries was to make sure that as you went up the escalation ladder, they dominated the other side. So one could argue that even if Iran and Lebanon launch rather selective attacks at Israel, that the Israelis will go back at them really hard. And if that happens, then the question is, what will Hezbollah do? What will Iran do? And to go to the subject we're talking about, what will Turkey do? What will the Russians do? And these are all open questions because none of us, can say for sure, exactly what's going on here and how will this play itself out. No, I don't think the Chinese will get involved. I think the Russians are already involved in the ways that you described. They're giving, ground-based air defense systems. They're giving radars. They're giving jamming equipment to the Iranians. How much, we don't know. There are some people who posit that given how late in the game the Iranians are getting this equipment, it's likely that the Russians will be manning the equipment. That you couldn't train the Iranians up quick enough to use this new equipment. I don't know whether that's true, but it would not be surprising if the Russians actually help the Iranians. I mean, you want to remember, we're helping the Israelis in this expected fight. And we helped them in the big fight on April 14th when Iran attacked the last time. So the Russians could be very well involved in the fighting in a very sort of subtle way. Who knows? But they're already committed to helping Iran. I mean, what we're doing here with the Israelis is that we're driving the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans closer and closer together. It's the axis of resistance on a global scale. And there's no evidence that this is going to change anytime soon. And this is certainly not in our interest. And as I've said to you before, you want to remember that if the Israelis slam Iran, they're going to give Iran very powerful incentives to acquire nuclear weapons. The Iranians are not far from the point where they have nuclear weapons, and we should be doing everything we can, and the Israelis should be doing everything they can to make sure they don't cross the nuclear threshold. But given our actions, and especially given Israel's actions, we're giving Iran very powerful incentives to acquire nuclear weapons. And the question is, will the Russians help us prevent that? I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it. We worry about the Saudis getting nuclear weapons from the Pakistanis. We believe the Saudis gave the Pakistanis monetary assistance to acquire the bomb, and that the quid pro quo is that China will give nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia needs those weapons. You want to remember that Saudi Arabia has said that if Iran gets nuclear weapons, they will get nuclear weapons. And that's where the Pakistani connection comes in. I'm not saying that would happen, that Pakistan would give them a nuclear weapon. But in the case of Iran, Iran has a very sophisticated nuclear infrastructure, and they're enriching uranium up to 60%. And that's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from enriching uranium up to 90%, which is weapons grade uranium. So the Iranians are not far from the point where they would have sufficient weapons grade uranium to develop at least one, maybe two or three bombs. And it would not take them that long to do it. And it would be extremely difficult for us and for the Israelis to prevent that. So what we want to do is we don't want to give the Iranians an incentive to cross the nuclear threshold, to become a nuclear weapons state. And the best way to do that is not